I'm really struggling to get going on this video. I've been procrastinating on it for about an hour, in part because there are some vulnerable things that I want to share with you. Or not that I want to share with you, but I feel God moving me to share with you. And I want to be clear about the reason I'm going to share them. The reason I'm going to share these vulnerable things has to do with helping you to understand the faith walk that God has me on so that you can understand what this looks like and so that you can find hope and strength and validation, knowing just one human being who's living this out as an example, because I know that the worthless shepherds are not sharing their testimonies with you. I know that this is not happening in those so-called churches you've gone to in your life. And how do I know that? Because the word tells me that. And because I experienced it too. And because God's Spirit tells me that. Everyone is greedy for gain, prophet and priest alike. No one's sharing with you their testimony. And the crazy thing about that is that when someone calls themselves a pastor or a shepherd, what they're supposed to be doing is they're supposed to have healed personally in Christ so that they have a testimony to share with you in order to teach transgressors his ways. Salvation and healing are used synonymously in the Bible. Physical healing, the process of physically healing in Christ, him dealing with you on your sins so that you can see the physical manifestations of healing. I'm not talking about medicine. I'm not talking about treatment, medicine, or any surgery or whatever, the world does. I'm talking about the healing that God established in Exodus 15:26, in 2 Chronicles chapter 7. If you obey me, I will not put on you any of the diseases I put on the Egyptians. I am the Lord who heals you. In Leviticus 14, I think 13 as well, where he's talking about defiling skin disease and defiling mold in a house. And he's teaching you how to isolate, go and return to him. And if you're not healing by the time you come out of that 7-day period of isolation, you're cast out of the camp. Why? Because he holds you accountable. 2 Chronicles chapter 7, when I send these things, if my people who are called by my name will return to me, I will return to them. Return, repent, humble yourselves, then he'll restore you. How many times does he say in the Bible, return to me and I will heal you, return to me and I will heal you? Even Jeremiah is talking about, why is my wound incurable? And what is he healing you of? He's healing you of the curse. And how is he doing that? Through ministry, through changing you, because you're in a condition that needs to change. You have to become a new creation. So why? Why is it that these worthless shepherds talk about their physical illnesses and diseases, their mental illnesses and diseases, so-called anxiety disorders and depression and addiction? I treated them, by the way. When I was in the world, when I was practicing in the world as a psychologist, I treated many of them. So I can tell you firsthand, why is it that they're talking about these things? Why are they talking in terms of syndromes and conditions? Why are they hiding out watching porn? Why are these things going on? God says they dress the wound of my people as though it were not serious. This curse is a wound, guys, that needs to be healed. And they've been entrusted to work with you to heal, and they don't do it themselves, so they can't help you. God says he's going to place his light on your lampstand. What's your lampstand? You got to be built. It's got to go on something. What is he going to testify to if someone is not receiving his ministry, if they have no testimony, if they have no experience of receiving God's ministry? How are they going to be able to share with you what it even looks like? That's why I share with you. That's why I expose myself, my own sin, my own humiliating situation, in order to help you to understand what God is doing with me, so that you can know that all of this that Jesus talked about in the Bible that is required was not hyperbole. It's real. When he talks about picking up your cross and suffering every day and receiving that bread from the mouth of God, or the bread of life, receiving that bread, you know, the way you're supposed to be praying every day, you're not praying so that he feeds you physically. You're praying for him to be feeding you spiritually. Give me my daily bread. Who's the daily bread? Jesus. Minister to me. Teach me who I need to be today. What do I need to do? Use me, Lord. Change me, then use me. Mold me, then use me. If you're new to the channel, when God called me, I was at the brink of death, but I was a very, very wealthy woman. I had 3 very lucrative businesses in the world. I was semi-retired at about 40 years old. I was never going to have to worry about money again. And then God started proving himself to me, teaching me how to heal through repentance, teaching me the connections between what my body was manifesting and the spiritual condition of my soul. And he healed me. And then he started talking with me about other things in my life, like these businesses that I had, like this specialty, this niche that I had. And he said, I've proven myself to you, and I've also talked with you about, things like science, being anti-Christ, claiming that there's no creator, being fundamentally predicated on the idea that there is no creator. Guess who your creator is? Jesus Christ. That is anti-Christ. It is an attempt to covet and usurp God's sovereign power over his creations. Not only that, but it is an attempt to confuse you regarding your design and the relationship that you're supposed to have with God in the covenant he extended to you. Exodus 15:26 says that if you obey him, he's not going to put on you diseases. He is the Lord who heals you. When people sinned in the Bible, when Miriam sinned by gossiping about Moses, what happened to her? She got leprosy. And Leviticus 13 and 14 talk with you about the correlation between defilement and illness, the correlation between going into isolation, which is isolation with God. The Israelites would have known that from Passover, and your responsibility for healing. When Jesus came, he didn't come with a DSM. He didn't come with some medical book to give you diagnoses or treatments or herbs. He said to repent. He was casting out spirits. He said things like, sin no more. Not do your best, sin no more. The covenant says, become holy as God is holy, not holy as you think you're holy. Sin no more, or something worse is going to happen to you. And John says that those who continue to go on sinning deliberately, there's no sacrifice left for them. Do you understand the expectations in the covenant? Because they're not the expectations that you're being preached from a pulpit. This is not some sissy covenant that everybody has a seat at the table. Where does it say that in the Bible? It says many are called, few are chosen. That means this is exclusive. It is not inclusive. But you're not being preached these things. No one's sharing this with you because they're not living it out. If they were living it out, they'd be sharing it. You think I want to talk with you about what I'm going to talk with you about today? Going from great wealth to what God has brought me to? Well, let me tell you, I don't. I'd rather just keep this between me and God. But the reason I share it with you is for your benefit. The reason I share it with you also is because it's my duty. This is my job. To share the lampstand that God has built in me through my testimony that he places his light on and testifies to. That's what I'm going to do with you. So when God proved himself to me, he started to ask me about certain things in my life. This is not of me. This niche, this specialty that you have that makes you a lot of money. What's it going to be? These contracts that you worked so hard for, they're not of me. What's it going to be? So he continues to do this, and he continues to do it in the covenant, and he talks about it. He says, those who have will be given more. Those who do not have, even what they have will be taken from them. What you need to understand is that the trust that God has given you in your life, whether that be in your in business, family, as a parent, as a boss, as a worker, because you also have trusts as a worker. Don't act like you don't. The position that God has placed you in your life, you need to take seriously. You need to take it up with him. How do you want me to live this out? And when you have done that, then you'll be given trust in his kingdom. Then you'll be given trust in his house to serve him. Until you are living that way, where you are not above reproach, questionable behavior. That's what that means. It doesn't mean that you're above questioning, because even Jesus answered questions, and none of us is better than him. Once you're living in a way where you as an individual are walking in the trusts he's given you, and then you're managing your house correctly, then you can be entrusted to manage his house. That shouldn't be a mystery to anyone. That's how he works. Too many people I've seen coming in and acting like they don't have anything to work on. Like they're just going to roll up their sleeves and get to work in God's church. You don't know how to work in God's house until he has worked with you. That's what's going on in these churches. There are these things, abominations that call themselves churches. So as we fast forward through this ministry that God has had me in, he has given me choices. He hasn't stripped me down. He hasn't taken anything from me. He's given me choices along the way. He's brought me down through those choices. He's brought me down to what he requires, to nothing, to totally relying on him. And he has caused me to abandon everything that I ever worked for in the world. Okay, so as I've shared my testimony with you on this channel, he has my home in foreclosure, which was supposed to be auctioned yesterday, though he told me, this is where you are to stay. This is where you are to stay. And my home is in foreclosure. Yesterday was supposed to be auctioned off, and they changed the date because God sent a fire through my neighborhood, and they postponed the date. He's going to continue to do things like that to keep me in this house, and I've told you that. I have not wavered on it, in spite of the fact that metaphorically, the Egyptians are chasing me in their chariots while I'm on foot up against the sea. God is going to make a way. At a certain point, when I needed income I lived on my savings, I lived on my retirement, having let go of everything. I let go of the 3 businesses on which I was semi-retired, where I was never going to have to worry about money again. My daughter was set. She had a full inheritance. I lived on all of it. And during the time that I was working, I purchased a building. And that building at a certain point was going to provide the money for me to continue to live out this ministry, or so I thought. God didn't tell me that. That was just something that I kind of figured, okay, well, I'm going to sell the building. But that building is what God used in order to teach me how to care for his house. That place was a marijuana dispensary when I purchased it. It was in shambles. It needed everything. New roof. I mean, it stunk inside like pot. It was disgusting. And I remodeled it, and it's beautiful. And as I was remodeling it, as I was cleaning it up, he was cleaning me up. And he was teaching me certain things that I'm not going to get into it in this video, but I write about it in a Soul Aligned and in Heart Owned series, and I've spoken with you about it on this channel. So it came time to sell the building. I put the building on the market. Had a realtor who claimed to be a Jew, though he said that he doesn't observe Sabbath. I don't know how that is. You know, some people define being a Jew as an ethnicity that I don't know, they just got grandfathered into it or something. But a Jew is not, in the fulfillment of what it means to be a Jew is not an ethnicity to God. What does he care about ethnicity? A Jew is one who's in the covenant of circumcision. That's what Paul says. They're defined by circumcision of the heart. And the guy would say weird things like he's going to manifest this. And it was just giving me a real cringy kind of feeling. When it came time where buyers were interested in the building, God told me he wasn't done with it yet. Now, mind you, this is the thing that was it's the last thing left. It's the last thing I have in the world to pay for my life, to pay for my house. This isn't a matter of me being attached to it, because having these 2 properties gives me I have a lot of responsibility. I got to clean both of them. I got to manage both of them. And I was continuing to pay 2 mortgages and 2 insurance plans and everything else. And now I had no money to do any of that anymore. And yet God tells me, I'm not done with the building. You're going to keep it. How? How? I have nothing left to pay for either one of these. Do you know that that place is not in foreclosure? Do you know that he protects it and watches over it? Do you know that as God was telling Jeremiah, Babylon is laying siege to Jerusalem, that he says, go take your money and go buy this field. And Jeremiah said to God, you're telling me that Babylon is laying siege to Jerusalem and yet you're telling me to buy a field? And God said, is there anything that I can't do? The land is going to be sold in this place again. And so what I'm telling you is not unbiblical. It sounds wacky. It sounds like lunacy. And it's right there in the Bible. Believe me, what I wanted to do was sell both of these places and go and live in a remote area away from everybody and just do this ministry from wherever it was that I was. But that's not what he had me do. He said, you are to stay in the place where I called you, and you're to trust me to take care of things, even though none of it makes sense. You know, he was saying to me earlier, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more because he has talked with me about how he's going to defy science. And what he said to me earlier had to do with mathematical calculations. He said, you guys trust in your mathematical calculations, A plus B equals C, but who's the one who makes it that way? You trust in the work of your hands. You plant a seed, you water it, you think you are making it grow, but I'm the one who makes it grow. Is he not the one who can also, you know, I have all these fruit trees here. In a second, he can send a wind and blow away all of the blossoms and ruin next year's crop. Read Haggai 1. He says, is it time for you to be building your own houses while my house remains in ruins? This is why I put holes in your purses. This is why I blew everything away that you did. Because you're not concerned about me. You're concerned about you. God can do whatever he wants. So I've continued to obey, even though I don't have income coming in. Aren't we supposed to plan our income and how that's going to work? I mean, yeah, you know, we are, I guess, up until God tells you, nope, you're going to go this way. We're taking a detour that doesn't make any sense, but here it is in the Bible. And I'm the one who's going to accomplish this. I'm at the point where I live with only enough income that he provides to me when he provides it to me. I have not paid my utilities, insurance, car payment, registration. I've paid nothing. I don't have money for that. When money comes in, I use it on basic needs. I use it on food and supplies that are very basic. God does not allow me to utilize government programs and assistance and things like that because this is his ministry and he's going to provide for it. And he's told me that. And he has. For months of me not having any money to pay for those, for things to run. A few months ago, I started to feel a little bit scared and I went and applied for CalFresh. I don't know if you have CalFresh where you're at. I don't know if that's the same name that they use where you are, but essentially it's government assistance for food. I know I'm not allowed to go to food banks and things like that because that comes through churches. And I'm telling you right now, God is not having me, he is not going to provide for me through some counterfeit church. But he also is not going to provide for me through the world. I applied for it, it went through, got approved, but I wasn't feeling confirmation from God. I got the little card that came in the mail. I left it in the drawer until I got confirmation from God, and I felt convicted that he did not want me using this, that he did not want me returning to something that I had to use, that I used at one time and relied on. See, that's the issue, is that I felt dependent on it. I was relying on it, being provided for by the world. I cut up the card and blocked all the email and text communication and all of that. Somewhere along that time, I found out that my kids were struggling so much. My daughter is pregnant. And I found out that she had been withholding from herself in order to provide for her family. Not eating, but not eating as much. And it's broken me as a parent to not be able to help and for her to not share that with me. and the kids figured some things out, and they've actually been helping me, and I hate it. I know that it's important. I know that the word says that those who help a prophet will receive a prophet's reward. I know that the word says that the children of widows or those without a husband are supposed to take care of them. And they do. And they do eagerly and so willingly. But the word also talks about an inheritance. That children don't save up for their parents, but parents save up for their children. And I did. I had a lot saved up for my daughter. And to be honest, that was part of the consolation prize for being a single mom who couldn't be everywhere, at all times, and was getting my doctorate, and my poor daughter suffered not having her mom. But God had me give it away. He had me give it away so that I could do what I'm doing now. And I've never heard my daughter complain about that. She's never complained. She's been fully supportive of what it is that I'm doing, and the fact that I gave up her inheritance in order to serve God, because she knows that that's the right decision. And so these are things that I've been taking up with God, trying to understand and make sure that I'm doing the right thing. And he's talked to me clearly. Yesterday I was talking with him about that inheritance again, and he was helping me to see a lot of what we're seeing right now, especially with the administration that's come in the United States. What good is that monetary inheritance in order to have a good life here, or in order to have a life in which you don't have to rely on God? I am providing her an inheritance. It's an eternal inheritance, and God says that he will bless to the 1,000th generation of those who love him. And we know that he uses that language of an inheritance that his people are going to have, and that's what I've led my family into. Well, yesterday, even though I got that great news that God had extended the date of the auction and given me, made a way for me to continue to remain in this house, which is what he has told me. Even though I know that he has kept my car here, he's kept all of my utilities on. I didn't plan anything. I continued to pay. And the word says, if you have that money, you pay it. That's what I did. I never withheld from anybody. But now that I don't have it, he has continued to make a way. Even though he's done all of this, and I got that news, it was after I got that news that something started to stir up in me. He started to test me. And I thought, I need something to be able to give back to my kids. One of the things that I'm able to give them right now is that, they buy the flour and, certain supplies, but I'm able to give them time. I bake their bread, I bake their tortillas, I, can their salsa, different things like that. Regular things that they use, I'm able to do those things, and it saves money, but it's also something I enjoy, and it's fresh, and it comes from my heart. And recently someone helped me out with a donation, with a gift, and I was feeling like, how can I accept someone else's money to provide for these things that I am entitled? I'm entitled to utilize those programs. I'm not lying. I'm not trying to work the system. I'm in need. And I started to go back in and try to find the information, and maybe I can call them, and maybe I can reestablish this. And, I just went through this whole thing yesterday. And then I stopped and I started journaling, and I just said, I need to know if this is okay. If it's not, then I won't do it, Lord. And I felt him speaking to me that I need to trust him. I need to trust him to take care of me, and I need to look at all of these things that he's done, that there's nothing that he has withheld from me. All of my needs have been met miraculously. But I have to tell you that there are times when I sit here and I think, any minute now, my electricity could be shut off, my gas could be shut off, the car could be repossessed. Any minute now, someone could post something on my door again about how they've sold my home, or this is what's happening, or whatever. Any minute now, someone could knock on my door, another darn realtor, telling me how they can save my home. This is how I'm living. And it's hard. But God has continued to tell me, you cannot return to Egypt and you must rely on me. You must trust in me. I'm doing something new. So I wrapped my heart around it. And then today I got a letter in the mail saying, you haven't used this card for X number of days. I think it's like 3 months or maybe longer. And so it's going to be canceled. And it had all of the information on the letter for me to be able to call in and ask them, can you send a new card or whatever to keep this service. You know, it might not seem like a big deal to you, but when you have nothing, this is a big deal. Because if God doesn't take care of you, not only do you have nothing, but you're going to have to go through the process of applying for this thing again and waiting for it to come through and everything else. And, you know, a week or two ago, I really didn't have any groceries in my house. I had some old dry goods that I was living on. Nothing fresh in my refrigerator, but God was showing me, he was teaching me how to get by on the dry goods that I had. And I was, you know, in a way, actually enjoying some of the things that I was eating. And then the fires came, and I thankfully didn't have anything fresh in my refrigerator, right? I had a couple things, like, you know, if I have onions, you know, I live alone, so if I have something like onions that are going to go bad, then or that I need to use up, I'll cut them up and put them in the freezer. So I was able to cook some dry beans with some onions and have a little flavor in there and have a little salt. And that was just fine by me. I mean, I was appreciative of it, but I was running out of food. And when the fires hit and I went to evacuate, I grabbed what I could to help my family because they were waiting on money to come in and they didn't have any money to go grocery shopping. But I want to tell you, so they were living on what they had in the house with a toddler and a pregnant mother. And now here comes grandma. But I want you to know that we sat down to eat, and every time we sat down to eat, it felt like we had abundance. I brought what I had at the house, which was some white beans that I had cooked and put in a couple of mason jars in my refrigerator, a bag of black beans, and actually I did have a roast that I'd been saving in my freezer so that when my daughter came to visit me, I would have something to feed her. And that roast I purchased when I closed out my bank account because there was no more money. I closed out my bank account with the last $55 that I had. And so that had been sitting in my freezer. So that's what I did. I went to my kid's house and we ate in abundance. And God just kept talking to me. He had been talking to me throughout the week because I hardly had any, you know, it was eating off of these dry goods, and he was giving me ideas of what I could eat and how I could combine certain things that I had in the house. He was showing me how to cook with just enough, just what I needed. You know, you don't have to put a whole onion in, for example. You can put half an onion and you get the taste. Sometimes if you have it in abundance, you use it in abundance and it's not even necessary. So by the time I got to my kids, I was able to, he had already been priming me for this. And that week we ate in abundance. They had some flour there. I baked bread. I made tortillas. And we had little pockets of things that we were able to enjoy, sort of tapas style, if you will. My neighbor had given me some avocados that fell from his tree during the windstorm. They had just returned from visiting family, and when they returned, for some reason they gave them all these cucumbers, so I was able to make a yummy cucumber and avocado salad. We had beans. I made Spanish rice. I mean, it was like we weren't missing anything, even though we were in this sort of limbo of waiting for them to, and the entire week that I was there, God provided. They did not get the money that they had been waiting on until I left. Can you believe that? I just realized that right now. I didn't even realize it in the moment, but the entire time that I was there, they were waiting on that money. I had some frozen nectarines from my tree in the freezer. I was able to make a cobbler. I mean, it was like we had yummy food, abundant food. But is that the abundance and prosperity that you hear about in counterfeit churches? Is that the version of it? Because God has provided for us truly abundantly. And yet, you hear the description of the situation that I'm in right now? All of our needs are provided for. And even some of our wants. I mean, no one needs cobbler. God has provided. He's maintained faithfulness. But it's not I'm going to give you everything up front so that you don't have to rely on me version of Christianity. That's not what God does. It's not our covenant with him. We're supposed to trust and believe and not be afraid, which is not like a pat you on the back. Don't worry, don't be afraid. It's a command. And this is what he's been telling me about that, he could have sent that piece of mail any day, and yet he tested me yesterday, and then he sent the piece of mail today and tested me again. And I put it in my junk drawer, and I sat down in my bed and just cried out to him and just pled with him to change my heart. Just change my heart into whatever you want, because it's really hard for me right now. I mean, it was, it just doesn't make sense in my mathematical equation that anyone should be providing anything for me, which is not the way that I'm accustomed to living. I am not accustomed to that at all. It's incredibly uncomfortable and humbling. But here's the thing, I shared with you as well that when I got the news from my neighbors that the fire was here, and I saw that it was a half a mile away behind Eaton Canyon Golf Course, and I saw that the winds were at 100 miles an hour, that fire could have spread here in 5 minutes. And I drew a bath. And the reason I drew a bath is because I did not want the temptation of going and grabbing my suitcase and packing up, even though I knew that it wouldn't just be a matter of packing up my suitcase. I would need to pack up the refrigerator, which there wasn't that much in there, but you know what I mean. I went in the bath because I know that there is nothing so urgent that I would put the work of my hands or anything else in front of God. And I sat there and I sorted scripture through with him. And I said, look, in Isaiah, it says, go, my people, hide yourselves, into your rooms, close your doors, hide yourselves for a little while until his wrath has passed by. So I trust you. I trust you if what you want me to do is to stay here. But if those evacuation orders come in, do you want me to defy the evacuation orders, or do you want me to go? Because I also know that you tell me to submit myself to the authorities. And I didn't stop there. The evacuation orders came in. My deal with God was, if they come in and you have not told me anything otherwise, I'm going to pack my bag and I'm going to leave. And I'm going to pack up the dogs and their food and, all of that. But I'm sitting right here. I'm sitting here. I'm not doing anything by the work of my hands. I'm waiting on you. Well, the evacuation order came through. I could hear the police outside in the street telling us that we needed to go. And I left, but I did not stop there. I continued to make sure that I was certain of what God wanted for me to do. I continued to pray and I continued to ask him, did I make the right decision? And I did. I stood in faith. Most of my neighbors actually stayed behind and hid out from the police because they were bringing people down to the station and charging them with misdemeanors. But my neighbors, I love my neighbors. I actually have very good neighbors, but they chose to stay behind and do this by the work of their own hands. And when I started to hear about, so-and-so's, wood chips in their yard caught on fire underneath their orange tree, and, I've been putting out embers on my roof, and, et cetera, I started to think, well, no one's there doing anything with my house, Lord. And I had to work my heart into the only thing that matters, which is God is protecting my house. And my house was protected. I was talking with my neighbor this morning. He told me that he keeps finding leaves that are charred, that he keeps finding leaves like that in his yard. I haven't come across a single leaf like that. And believe me, there were a lot of leaves. Because of the windstorm, there were a ton of leaves that I picked up. I did not come across not even a singed leaf. There was no damage on my property, not even a hint of damage on my property. Now, I want to talk with you about the ways that God was talking with me one of the things, as I, have demonstrated to you, is that he has been talking with me about not returning to Egypt. He has been talking with me about fully relying and trusting in him. He's been talking with me, reminding me of things that he's said with regard to judgment that he's going to bring, judgment that he's bringing now. And I'll talk with you a little about that, but I don't want anyone treating this like some psychic reading. There's a purpose to what he's doing. This is not about knowing the play-by-play before God does things. That's not how he talks with his servants. And it's not for you to go and pick this up by the work of your own hands. So don't let this be a stumbling block to you. Don't be trying to figure out God's next move. I am fully convinced. I know this to be true because God has done this. He's taught me this, that if I decided to keep that card or to call them up and reissue a card and have this be the thing that I'm relying on, he would not only foil it, he would bring judgment on me because I was not willing to trust him. And of course, one of the things that I take up with him is, but what about these, the people who have helped me, people who have sent me a gift, these kinds of things, that they have this in their heart. Listen, when Paul talks about this, when he addresses it, he says, it's not that I desire your gifts. He says, I desire that this be to your credit. It's not something that anybody is required to do. This is not tithing. I was talking with someone the other day about tithing, and I was telling him tithing was fulfilled through sacrifice. It was always associated with sacrifice. What God desires is for us to be cheerful givers. And what Paul said is that God provides for his needs and that he appreciated the gift. He was touched by the gift, but he desires that this be to the credit of those who are giving the gift. I want you to know that because you have been manipulated by false teachers into thinking that you buy your way into heaven or that you're obligated to do this because this is part of tithing and that you need to go in Mormonism. I don't know about any other church, but in Mormonism, you have a meeting with the bishop once a year to make sure that that your taxes match the 10% requirement that you're to give to the Mormon church. This is not what God requires. Your sacrifice is coming from your heart. Your sacrifice is not coming from your pocketbook. If the way that God is molding your heart is to circumcise from that financial provision, then okay, that's what you do. He's done that with me. He's had me give up everything. I was a great idolater of money, of the wealth that I had. And he had me give all of it up in order to give to you. And that needed to happen in my heart. So what you do to God. It's not what you do to another human being. It's what you're doing to him. And he will guide your steps. He's the one who's going to put on your heart what to do. So the message that he kept speaking to me is don't return to Egypt. Rely on me. And in the word, it talks about it, like, for example, in Isaiah, those who are trusting in Assyria or those who are trusting in Egypt and their chariots and their, in the strength of these other nations and their gods, which is nothing. It's nothing. But then we've become so accustomed to it, and we think that our math needs to add up in a particular way, when God's the only one who makes it happen that way. We can understand how things typically go, but God doesn't have to go by those rules. He can set the rules and then he can change them. He can do a new thing. I've been watching the things that have been happening since God's been pressing on me that this judgment was coming. And we're into it. We're well into it. Someone messaged me today who lives in Lahaina and told me that of those whose homes survived the fires, not only did FEMA not help them, but they had to wait a year before even moving back to their survived home. I'm looking at, Donald Trump made a trip to North Carolina and to, well, I didn't actually see where he went in California. I'm going to assume that maybe Palisades, maybe Altadena, I don't know. But I was watching an interview today where people were sharing their testimonies of what they've been experiencing in Asheville, North Carolina, which, of course, by the way, was not the only place hit, but it's the only place that, we've heard anything about. But in Asheville, North Carolina, I heard people talking about, first of all, some pretty horrific stuff, watching dead bodies, their neighbors, floating away, houses floating away. But they were talking about having to fight with their insurance companies. I mean, we're months out of this. These people still don't have help from their insurance companies. But see, I've talked with you about this before, that when we have things like that, when we have insurance, that's what we put our hope in. These are like backup plans for God, just in case God isn't who he says he's going to be. And then we say, oh, praise God. But really what we mean is praise the insurance company or whoever came through, right? Because that's not who we're not relying on God. And so this is what I'm trying to tell you is if you rely on him, he's going to pass over you. He's going to take care of you. But if you rely on these other things, if I were to rely on that card and the assistance, God talks about how you're going to eat, but you're not going to be satisfied. You're going to drink, but you're going to continue to thirst. He'll foil it. He'll send judgment on me for not relying on him, and I do fear God. So I heard that from the person in Lahaina. I heard from the people in North Carolina that FEMA hasn't helped, insurance hasn't helped. People are living in tents and campers in freezing weather. The people in the communities have been the ones who've had to help each other because the government in which so many people put their hope, they haven't done anything. And don't you dare say, well, Donald Trump will be better. That was just a corrupt government. That's not what you're supposed to put your hope in. I've heard from people in Altadena who've had to set up donation centers. If they had a home that survived, they're setting up donation centers because the government has done nothing. We can't rely on Egypt. We can't rely on human beings, even human beings who mean to do well. Maybe Donald Trump intends to do well. It seems like he intends on distributing this money in a correct way. I'll take his word for it. But we can't rely on human beings. It's a trap. We have to trust in God. He has to be the one we're relying on. And if we end up getting something that he wants to provide through someone else, then that's what he's doing, okay? I'm not saying that my situation is your situation because God's working with my heart in a particular way based on freeing me of those strongholds of idolatry that I've had in my life. I want to talk a little bit about the things that I have been talking about that I told you. I believe that his judgment started with North Carolina because that was the first thing that he had started talking with me about. I mean, he'd been talking with me about sword, famine, wild beast, and plague, and then he said to me that day that this was starting, that he's about to overflow their hiding place. And I talked with you about it on this channel. I told you that I was outside doing some chores. He spoke it to me and I said, all right, give me a witness. And when I got inside, I had forgotten that I had was filling up my canner, sitting on my counter because it's too big to put in the sink. It was sitting on my counter and it was overflowed all over my kitchen. Something that I did not tell you, and I don't really regret not telling you. I think God has used it in a way in order to testify to me personally, because if he wanted me to know that I needed to speak this, then he would have had me speak it. But with regard to the fires, he kept saying to me for a week, a fire will spread from there to all Israel. And I think that's in Ezekiel 5. The thing is, I couldn't have known that he was saying that a literal fire was going to spread. I had no idea. But I'm telling you that the week before those fires happened, he kept saying that to me over and over and over. And I told you more recently that he said to me that none of those people will be left, none of their wealth and nothing of value. Now, I don't know what's going to happen. You need to know that. God's prophets don't know everything. They know what God says, and that's it. And they don't step ahead and try to figure God out. God is not a mystery to be figured out. You stay with where he's at. But if he says, but let me just put out this example to you. You can have a well-intentioned individual distributing money. What happens when God blows away the money? What happens when it's not there? And what good would money have been to the Israelites while they were wandering the wilderness? Just because this is the structure right now does not mean it's going to continue to remain the structure. And even if you have money, what happens if there's a famine and there's not enough for you to purchase? Of what value is your money? Your money is only of value if there's something to purchase. And that thing that you purchase, let's say food, is only of value if it suits its purpose. So when God says that you're going to eat and not be satisfied, you're going to drink but still thirst, of what value are those things? And if you pack up your storehouse, let's say that, I packed up my storehouse and I had all of this food preservation and whatever else like the preppers do, right? In my storehouse, and God sent a fire or a flood. Of what value is it to me now? None of this stuff matters. None of it matters. And it's going to matter even less in the days to come. I want to remind you of some of the things that he has said to me regarding the coming judgment. He's going to defy science. We're missing something in our mathematical equation. And the thing we're missing is God. It only works the way that we think it works if God says it does. No one can make a seed grow. You plant the seed, you water it. God decides whether it's going to grow. He's the one who sends the birds to go peck it out of the ground. He's the one who's going to decide. And what he established in his word, in your covenant, in Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28, is that you are blessed for obedience. Even if it doesn't make sense, keep this building. Oh, okay, sure, God. The last thing that's going to pay for my house, all right. Buy this field, okay, Lord. Right as Babylon's laying siege to Jerusalem, okay, I'll do it. Don't utilize support from that place because I don't need them to provide for my ministry. Okay, Lord. My fridge was bare just a couple weeks ago. My children are helping me to pay for basic needs. Even to the extent that for the week that I was there, they didn't have any money to go and get extra groceries. I no longer have the backup plan of a credit card because I can't afford to pay those credit cards. Like you think about these things when you're brought to this place and you don't have any of these things. How do you live, guys? You really do have to rely on God. You start to think about, wow, all of the backup plans that you've had for him. He's going to defy science. It's going to keep coming and it's going to be difficult to clean up. Now, this is regarding the judgment. It will be everywhere. This has continued to happen throughout the world, and it's going to continue to happen throughout the world. And you're not going to rebuild, and you're not going to be able to clean it up. There are a lot of homeless people now who lived in the hills of Altadena. That's actually a pretty wealthy area, the hills of Altadena. There are some parts not so much, but the hills of Altadena, that's a pretty wealthy area. Government's not helping. Insurance is not fulfilling their obligation. What will you do when he comes for you? And listen to what I'm saying. If you pick this up by the work of your own hands and you start prepping and you start doing all of that stuff, he will bring judgment on you. So what do? You return to him. You fast and return to him. Rain is coming now. So we have all of these, burn scars. Water doesn't absorb well in places like that. And all of the vegetation that has burned is what holds those hills up. So what do you think is going to happen when the rain comes this weekend, potentially? Not to make no mention of the fact that there's absolute filth. There's dust and ash and debris and burnt chemical. Where's that going to go? There are dangerous winter snow and ice storms happening in the south. Fires all over. Turkey just had a fire, and I think I can't remember how many people died in that fire. I think it was 74 or something like that. At a ski resort, people were throwing their children out the window. And then in India, they had a train accident where someone yelled fire, which was a false alarm, and people were jumping out of the train. There were floods not that long ago in Europe. Terrible, terrible floods. People losing everything, their farms. New wars that are starting. Look at what's going on between Colombia and Venezuela. So my message to you is that you need to be single-mindedly, fully reliant on Him, not on the work of your own hands. So check your heart and make sure that you aren't trusting in your backup plans, because He will not only foil them, but He will send judgment. His covenant is blessings for obedience, punishment for disobedience. No one flies under the radar. So if He tells you to rely on Him, and He tells you not to rely on the work of your own hands, and you choose to go and take money out, to go and, prep, which is commonplace now, right? Among all the Jesus shirt people on YouTube, all the preppers and the homesteaders, they tell you what things you need to stock up on. That's a heart issue, guys. Don't fall into that. If that's what we were supposed to be doing, that's what God would have me doing. He wouldn't have me sharing this message with you today. What's going to happen when there's nothing on the grocery counters? You know that God was able to feed His people manna in the wilderness. Do you believe that? Because if you believe it, then you should believe that He can do it again. That you don't need to go out there like people did with COVID and fight over rolls of toilet paper and bags of beans and whatever else. God's people are supposed to believe in a God who is sovereign, who's capable of doing anything. And if you really believe that, you don't need a backup plan for Him. I hope my testimony means something to you guys, because it's a hard thing to share, to be honest. The lower He brings me, the harder it is for me to share and to want to share. But at the end of the day, if my testimony is going to give someone hope, if my testimony is going to give someone an example of what God really does require, that comes before my own comfort. Please discern this message with God.